All right, today we're diving into the work of this guy, Peter Turchin. He's a scientist who has this wild idea that history, well, it's not just a bunch of random events. He thinks there's an actual formula, a kind of hidden rhythm that explains why great powers rise and why they fall. So let's see if we can uncover this formula that might, just might, predict our own future.
I mean, it's one of the biggest questions in all of history, right? Why do great empires collapse? Think about it. From the Romans to the Mongols, it seems like every single one has an expiration date stamped on it. So is it just bad luck, a few terrible decisions, or is there something deeper at play? Well, we're about to explore a theory that says no, it's not random at all. And this is the really radical idea at the heart of this whole thing. I mean, we're told to think of history as this story of, great leaders and unpredictable accidents. But what if that's wrong? What if we could actually analyze history like a science, to look for predictable patterns, for cycles that just keep repeating themselves time and time again? Okay, so how do we even begin to solve a mystery this big? Well, we start with a whole new field of study that's trying to find a scientific solution to history's greatest puzzle. It's called cliodynamics. That comes from Clio, who was the Greek muse of history, which is pretty cool. The basic idea is to take just massive amounts of historical data. We're talking everything from economics and population stats to records of warfare, and plug it all into mathematical models. The goal? To see if we can find the huge overarching forces that are really driving history. And here's a great way to think about it. It's kind of like physics, No physicist on Earth can predict the path of one single tiny gas molecule bouncing around in a box. It's impossible, but they can predict the temperature and the pressure of the entire system with incredible accuracy. Cliodynamics tries to do the exact same thing for us, for society. Forget trying to predict what one person is going to do. Instead, let's try to predict the behavior of the whole society.
All right, so if there really is a formula for history, what are the key ingredients? What are the variables that actually build an empire from the ground up?
What is it? Is it just having a brilliant general, or maybe superior technology, a booming economy? Well, Turchin says it's none of those, not really. He argues it's something way more fundamental, a kind of social energy that's the real secret ingredient to building an empire.
And that secret ingredient has a name, asabiya. It's this amazing term from a 14th century scholar named Ibn Khaldun, and it basically means social glue. It's that invisible force, that thing that makes people willing to sacrifice for the group, to really trust each other, and to act like one single powerful unit. And there's no better example of this asabiya than the Mongols. Seriously, they weren't the most advanced civilization, they didn't have the biggest numbers, but their internal discipline, their cohesion, it was absolutely off the charts. One historian at the time even wrote that they were the most obedient people in the world. There was almost zero internal conflict, and that let them project this unbelievable power outward. But here's the real twist, the paradox of it all. When we hear the word cooperation, we think of something nice, right? Teamwork, helping each other out. But the Mongols show us something darker. They show us that to achieve oppression on such a massive scale, you have to start with the foundation of intense, hardcore internal cooperation. To be that brutal to everyone else, you first have to be incredibly unified on the inside.
Okay, so if this asabiya thing is the engine that builds empires, where does it come from? What's the factory that produces it? Because it doesn't just pop up out of thin air. Turchin argues that it's forged in a very specific and usually very violent kind of environment. He calls this environment a metaethnic frontier. Think of it as a pressure cooker. This isn't just a simple border on a map. No, this is a major civilizational fault line, a place where two totally different worlds, different religions, different cultures, are smashing into each other for centuries. And that constant existential threat from the other side creates a simple choice for the people living there: cooperate or die.
And you see this pattern play out over and over again in history. The constant war between the Romans and the Germanic tribes, it forged the incredibly disciplined Roman legions. The centuries of raids between the Russians and the Tatars on the steppe, that created the fiercely loyal Cossack warriors. And yeah, the brutal 300-year conflict on the American frontier, it created a super cohesive and expansionist colonial society. It's the same pattern. But here's the thing. We all know that empires don't last forever. That incredible social glue, that asabiya, that builds them up, it eventually starts to fade. And this next part of the formula explains exactly how an empire's success actually plants the seeds of its own downfall. There's this old saying, peace brings war and war brings peace. And that That just perfectly captures this whole idea of history moving in cycles. The very peace and stability that a society with high asabiya creates, well, that peace sets off a chain reaction, a predictable series of events that almost inevitably leads right back to conflict.
And Turchin calls this the secular cycle. It's this process of decay that happens over generations. Okay, so follow me here. It starts with peace and prosperity. Great, right? Well, that means the population grows. Pretty soon you have way too many workers, which means wages start to drop. At the exact same time, you've got way too many ambitious, wealthy people, the elites, all fighting for the same handful of powerful jobs. What happens next? Inequality just explodes. And that shatters that sense of shared purpose. The social glue, the asabiya, it just dissolves, and the society begins to tear itself apart.
And Rome is the textbook case for this. The early Roman Republic, it was built on the solidarity of small farmers. They valued shared sacrifice. That was their whole thing. But fast forward to the late Empire, and what do you see? A society completely dominated by a tiny handful of insanely wealthy nobles, while almost everyone else was left with nothing. That feeling of, we're all in this together? Gone. Replaced by infighting, corruption, and endless civil war.
And let's just pause on the sheer scale of that inequality for a second. By 400 AD, your average Roman noble was 200,000 times wealthier than a peasant. I mean, that is a gap that's almost impossible to even wrap your head around. How can you possibly have social solidarity, a sense of community, when one person is that rich and most people have literally nothing?
And at the end of the day, that's the real killer. This kind of insane inequality isn't just an economic issue. It's a social poison. It completely destroys the trust, the shared identity, the asabiya that made the empire strong to begin with. It leaves the whole society hollowed out and just fragile, ready to break.
So what does this big formula of rise and fall mean for us, right here, right now? This is where the theory gets really interesting and maybe a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, this isn't just some academic exercise about dusty old empires. Turchin takes this exact same model and applies it to today. And his argument is that a lot of modern societies are showing all the classic signs of being in that decay phase of the cycle. Just take a look at the data on trust in government. Remember, asabiya is all about that social cohesion, our ability to trust each other and work together. When you see trust in major institutions just plummet like that over a few decades, well, that's a huge warning sign. It's telling you that the social glue is getting weaker.
And the parallels, they don't stop there. Just think about the other parts of the cycle. Stagnating wages for most people sounds a lot like that labor glut. A huge number of college graduates all fighting for a small number of good jobs. That's what he calls elite overproduction. And of course, skyrocketing wealth inequality and deep, bitter political divisions. I mean, these are the absolute textbook symptoms of a society that's losing its social cohesion, its asabiya.
So Turchin's model suggests that all societies run on these long cycles of coming together and then falling apart, of cohesion and then decay. And that leaves us with one really big question. It's not about the past, it's about right now. We have to ask ourselves, which phase of the cycle are we in?